In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the world of algebra. Algebra is a branch of mathematics that involves using letters to represent numbers we don't yet know. It's a bit like when you're planning to make an apple pie. Before reading the recipe, you might say, I need an amount of apples. Or instead, you can say, I need X apples. This X could be 3, 4, or 10, whatever the recipe calls for. Other than letters, we also use special words in algebra to describe different things. Today we're going to learn these words together, so that when you see or hear them, you'll know exactly what to expect. The first word we'll cover is expression. In English, to express something means to show or communicate it, like expressing your opinion. In algebra, an expression is a mathematical sentence that contains numbers, symbols, like plus, minus, times, divided, and letters. When they are expressed or shown, we call them expressions. For example, 2x plus 3y. Here we have numbers, 2 and 3, letters, x and y, and the plus sign. This whole combination is called an expression because it expresses a mathematical idea. Here are a few more examples, and each one is considered a separate expression. Now, let's talk about the second word, term. If an expression is like a sentence, then a term is like a word in that sentence. We can break any expression into its separate terms. As you can see, terms are separated by addition or subtraction signs. I am sure that you noticed that some terms have letters, and some don't. This is because there are two different types of terms. Variable terms. These are terms that include letters, such as 5a, negative 10n, or 8x, and constant terms. These are terms that only contain numbers, such as 4 or negative 1. Now, before we dive deeper into these two types, let's talk about the letters that we see in algebra. These letters are called variables or pronumerals. The word variable comes from vary, meaning to change. They are called variables because the letters represent numbers that can change. For instance, y could be 10 in one expression and 6 in another. It varies, so we call it a variable. These letters can also be called pronumerals, where pro means in place of, and numeral means number. This makes sense because variables are used in place of numbers. So, whether we call them variables or pronumerals, they are letters that stand for numbers that change. Check out all these variables. Well, I know that it is hard to believe that letters can be used instead of numbers, but trust me, you do this every day without noticing. Let's say, you see a jar of lollies. You run and put your hand in it, trying to take as many as you can hold. Then your mom asks you, how many do you have? Until you count them. You can tell her, I have X amount. And after counting them, you can find out that X equals 12. Now that you understand a letter represents a number, let's talk about the numbers in front of the letters, which are called coefficients. The word coefficient comes from co, meaning together, and efficient from effect, which implies working together. In algebra, the coefficient and the variable work together through multiplication. For example, 3y means 3 is multiplied by y. And yes, in algebra, the only sign that can be invisible is the multiplication sign. They decided not to put it to avoid confusing it with letter x. So 3y is 3 times y. This means if y is 10, then 3y is 3 times 10, which is 30. The number 3 is the coefficient of y, because it works with y to produce a result. Coefficients also tell us how many of the pronumeral or term do we have. So 3y means we have 3 of y in this expression. Let us read all the coefficients in these examples one by one. 7 is the coefficient of x, which means we have 7 of x. Negative 2 is the coefficient of y. That means we are short in y by 2. Then 6 is the coefficient of t, means we have 6 of t. Negative 4 is the coefficient of u. Lastly, the coefficient of c is 1, but we don't need to write it out explicitly, because it's understood that when a variable appears without a visible coefficient, it is 1. We can see only one c here. Now the last thing, let's go back to the two types of terms. Variable terms have both, a number and a letter. They are called variable terms, because as the value of the letter change, the value of the term changes too. For example, in 2a, if a is 5, the term becomes 10, which is 2 times 5. But if a is 7, the term becomes 14. On the other hand, constant terms don't have letters, they are just numbers. For example, 2 is always 2, and it never changes. That's why it's called a constant. Let us recap them all. The whole mathematical sentence is called an expression. Expressions consist of separate terms. Terms can be variable terms when they include letters, or constant terms when they are only numbers. Letters in algebra are called variables or pronumerals, and they stand for numbers. Numbers that appear in front of letters are called coefficients, and they are multiplied by them, but the multiplication sign is invisible. Well done.